So it's my great honor to, co-host this R&D symposium as on behalf of UniversityTech.io and of course PitchMatter and MarketMate. We had a great, first half with the global diverse speakers, and I think the second half is going to get even more interesting and more detailed oriented. We're going to talk about the value of death, failure rates. Go deeper into the root causes of different commercial pathways, which ones are actually working, which ones are not, and great pleasure to introduce Joy. He's a great friend and supporter of University Tech. I mean, I first met him in Delhi this year at the STEM conference, and he was very gracious with his time, and I was very humbled and impressed, by his commitment to upgrade the capacity of and standards of technology transfer in India. He's a very senior innovation and technology transfer leader with extensive experience advancing university research towards real-world impact. Joy serves as the Director of Intellectual Property and Licensing at the Research Foundation for SUNY, which is State University of New York, where he supports commercialization, licensing, startup formation, and industry engagement across the SUNY research enterprise. Joy is also an immediate past chair of AUTM, which is the trade body for tech transfer in the US, and a registered technology transfer professional. Over his career, he has worked closely with academic institutions, inventors, companies, and global innovation partners to strengthen pathways from discovery to market. His work focuses on building practical collaborative models that help academic inventions reach society. So again, Joy, thank you so much for agreeing to join us and deliver this expert talk on the value of death. And I hand it over to you. Thank you again, Joy.
Sure, you're welcome, Parag. Thank you so much for the invite, and it's been a pleasure to participate in this talk. Quick question, I think we are running a little late. I just want to get a sense of how much time we have for this. Shall I get the entire 30 minutes, or would it be curtailed to shorter? Just curiosity.
Shall we do 25 minutes, sir? I'll just negotiate with
Okay,
you a
all
bit.
right. Let's go.
Thank you.
That's fine. That should be it. So I'm going to actually provide you with some perspectives, and hopefully you can see my slides um about this concept that we are going to be talking about, which is basically in around the space of why it just so happens that universities struggle with trying and commercializing their technologies and taking it to the marketplace to the extent that they want it to be. So I'm going to really go through and fly through most of my slides. I will introduce myself in the interim. But like Parag mentioned, I've been associated with the academic technology transfer for about 25 years now. And prior to that, of course, was working in the corporate sector. But my entire life has been dedicated towards working toward getting innovations to the marketplace. And it's been quite an uphill task, and not sure what the audience is like, but at the very least, what I can expect from my presentations to reach you is the fact that if you're sitting on the tech transfer side, it'll probably resonate with you quite a bit as to why it's hard for us to eventually get to the point where the technologies get commercialized. And at the same time, if you're sitting on the startup side, there is an absolutely large amount of treasure trove that is sitting with the universities for you to eventually take a look at and start businesses around. And there are several of those technologies that are really looking for a home. And so you, as a potential entrepreneur and a startup person, can eventually reach out to the universities, whether you're working within the US jurisdiction or outside in your nation that you're working with, and get access to these technologies that can be licensed and taken off. So here, of course, I'm going to be talking mostly about the pain points and why it is so difficult for technology transfer professionals and the university to get the technologies off the hump. But I would obviously begin by stating that, at the time when I started this tech transfer journey myself, I was working in the corporate sector. And for me, intellectual property and patents were something that was a no-brainer. So let's talk about, some examples to give you a sense of what it was when I was in the private sector. And many of you will obviously understand this. I just talk about, let's say, the company Uber. And as you know, Uber made $52 billion of revenues in the year 2025. What you ask Uber is how many cars do they have, and they would come back saying they have no cars whatsoever. So what is Uber thriving on? It's thriving on all the algorithms, everything to do with the platform they have, and all the IP that is generated, which eventually makes Uber a successful business model. And so $52 billion of revenues in the US only from not owning a single car. Similarly, Airbnb made upwards of $12 billion in 2025 without owning a single hotel. And again, all the companies that you see around are there in this space only because of the fact that they're thriving on intellectual property. And the interpretation of intellectual property in a private company is very different from what it is in the academia. And that's primarily the reason why academia is in a different space with the way they handle intellectual property and the way it is handled by private companies. So it was very easy for me to eventually think that when I got my first job and the paycheck that was associated with it as a licensing associate at a university looked astronomical. I thought it was so easy for me to eventually take on this job, take the best and brightest inventions from the faculty members and commercialize it. Because obviously, these are very, very good ideas, and they're the brainwave from one of the best scientists or academicians that come. So it would be so much easier for me to do so. But unfortunately, that was not the case. And part of the reason why that is the case is because the academic journey for an innovation to get from where it begins as an idea to its commercial marketplace is a much more convoluted and tough journey. And as you see at the bottom of the graph, from the beginning of the journey, which comes from an idea funded by federal research dollars, which is upwards of close to 90%, the idea is then transferred into basic science, which becomes the cornerstone for other faculty members to take more federal dollars to make those basic science into applied science, and then starts the journey of its to get commercialized outside of the university. So universities are, of course, research and enterprises that eventually help with getting the research to the next level, but they are not the entities that would want to commercialize it. So commercialization of products is done by technology transfer professionals using the process of licensing. In other words, they would take these technologies, they would eventually wrap them around intellectual property, look for partners that can help them with taking these technologies to the next level and then commercializing it. And in order for this system to continue to work efficiently, we have to incentivize the inventors. So from a university tech transfer standpoint, whatever revenues come from commercializing of these technologies, upwards of 30% and anywhere between 30 to 50% is eventually given back to the inventors for them to be incentivized so that they can come back to our office and give us some more ideas that we can eventually end up harboring into something new. Portion of the money also goes to the inventors department, or it goes to the college from where the inventors come, so that that money can be recycled to be doing more research from them. And a sliver of it comes to my office, where I eventually sustain and keeps the light on, and my all my folks get paid for their salaries that they eventually do. So a cartoonish depiction of what tech transfer is in an academic setup is depicted here. Invention disclosures come, faculty members knock at our door, they give us a disclosure, we do the assessment, and if you again run your eyes from left to right, those assessment eventually yields in us filing patents. We try to look for commercial partners by virtue of marketing, and then when we find partners, which is either in the form of startup or entrepreneurs that would like to start a business. And my thinking is that most people in the audience today are from the entrepreneurial side of things. They would eventually take on these technologies, would start a business around it, or they would eventually end up going into the hands of companies that are existing and would like to take the technology by virtue of a license and take those technologies to the commercial marketplace. So you see the scheme here is very different from the scheme that I showed in the beginning. What did I say at the beginning? That companies like Airbnb, companies like AstraZeneca, Pfizer, companies like Uber handle patents in a very different way from what is necessarily being handled in the form of technology transfer professionals see in the academia. And what is the fundamental difference? Why it is different here as opposed to in a company is the fact that companies always start the research based on their own money, usually, again, and based on a problem that they are solving. However, in the academic sector, the faculty member gets a grant from the government, and that grant need not necessarily be driven by a problem that they're solving. So fundamentally, the issue with academic tech transfer is where the concept is flipped around, that we tech transfer professionals take a look at the invention and then try to look for if there is any problem. So it's like a key finding a lock versus a lock finding a key. So that is primarily the reason why it's much more harder for tech transfer professionals to take these technologies and find a home. And that's where entrepreneurs come in play because they can eventually help us doing what it is. Let me exemplify based on one actual story that happened in my laboratory, and that'll resonate hopefully with you all. Here are two faculty members, John Elias and Wayne Westerman, while I was working at University of Delaware. They came to me and told me that they have developed a new keyboard that they can actually use for its functionality, and this is way back in 2003, on a glass panel. So this keyboard is unique. So you can see John holding the keyboard, which is basically the keyboard built on glass panels. In those days, there used to be those clunky keyboards which you had to eventually press with your fingers. And he said the reason why he was motivated to develop it on a glass panel was because he had some issues with a family member who had carpal tunnel, and this pushing of the space button on the clunky keyboards was very hard. So to make it easier and softer for them, he developed this keyboard. So they came to our office, they gave it to us, and we were rolling our eyes. We didn't know what to do with it because how many people have carpal tunnel? And in those days, again, internet and computers wasn't all that big. We thought that this would be a sea change. People will have to really adapt to this. So we didn't find any value to it. This was filed as a patent around it's being a medical device for carpal tunnel assistance. However, these two individuals, they eventually wanted to start a business around it. And if you go to Google and find out, their business was called Fingerworks. And they struggled for 5 long years before they eventually said, we're going to call quits. And then suddenly for 1 year, they were very silent. And then they said, here, Joy, can we come and get a license from you and eventually get the technology to get commercialized? Because I think we have found a home for it. And lo and behold, the home that they found was Steve Jobs, who was then thinking of building his first iPhone. And those were the times when BlackBerry was more common. And he wanted to take away the keyboard portion of his iPhone and build it into something that was more productive. So, in some respects, this technology found a home, and it's right now sitting in your pockets and every which device that you can think of, called the touchscreen technology. And the reason why this was successful is because we then found a solution to a problem that the inventors did not have, but somebody like Steve Jobs have. And of course, he made us really embarrassed by writing a book. And in his book, he dedicated a full page on how the University of Delaware Technology Transfer Office helped him to get the technology that he needed to become the touchscreen technology. So this is a general idea of why we find it extremely hard to, as academic tech transfer professionals, to find a home for these technologies because these technologies are too early. The market is usually unclear. The industry is usually fought with technologies that want to be taking on these technologies that have higher or lower risk. In other words, the de-risking has been done. Many of these entrepreneurs want to get different kind of incentives, which doesn't align. And usually, again, they would say that IP is not the only thing. They want something more than IP. So we have to support them with what they need. However, having said that, academic tech transfer has been very successful in the US. And because I've lived in the US, so my talk will be skewed more towards academic tech transfer here in the US, where the government pumps in a lot of money. And so in the past 25 years, we have been able to successfully get upwards of $1 trillion of GDP into the system, created more than 6.5 million jobs, and approximately 200 plus drugs and vaccines have been created through academic tech transfer. 70% of licenses have gone to startups. And so we consider ourselves to be fairly successful in doing the academic tech transfer, in spite of the fact that we struggle to find a home for these technologies. And just a quick glimpse of some of the successful ones that you would all remember and see that you've encountered in real life. You're using the Google platform that came from Stanford. the CRISPR-Cas gene editing technology that is very, very predominant nowadays came from UC Berkeley. Obviously, the mRNA vaccine that was the big hit, and many of you must have taken it during COVID, also comes from University of Pennsylvania, and so on and so forth. So a lot has happened in the space where technologies from the universities have gone to the commercial pipeline. Many successful ones, though at the end of the day, the number is still dwindling at less than 20%. And less than 10% in some cases. So earlier days, it used to be a matter of great pride to say that we have a lot of patents, but now there is a lot of difference that's happening in the scheme of things. Patents in and of itself really doesn't mean anything. What is more important is to make sure that tech transfer offices show impact. And in today's day and age, and I don't know how many of you are from the US listening to me, you will realize that the current administration has been extremely hard on universities to make sure that they kind of say their stories in the form of impacts, the way I just mentioned to you in the past. And so patents by numbers are not going to be enough for it to be considered to be a successful tech transfer office. They've also asked companies to be co-creators, so using startups, the number of startups we create, the amount of efficiency with which startups are created is important. The government is also pumping in a lot of money, like I said, upwards of $1 billion every year of taxpayers' money. So the taxpayers are getting more and more worried that what is the money really going and so what value? So they are going back to the university tech transfer offices to ask for accountability, and the federal government is accountable. So we are making sure that whatever activities we do on a regular basis, we eventually report to the government. And there is obviously a lot of global competition happening. All the geopolitics that you see, including the nuclear technology and green technologies, so on and so forth, AI, all the resources that you're looking for is really making it more and more important for us to make sure that the translation happens more as an intentional design than just a onesie going forward. I'm going to take a quick commercial break here to talk a little bit about myself. My name is Joy Goswami, and like Parag mentioned, I'm the director of the Research Foundation at SUNY. I'm also the immediate past chair of AUTM, one of the largest associations that handles tech transfer. We have more than 3,000 plus members at AUTM, and those that are coming from as many as close to 850 plus universities and hospital systems. And of course, you can just quickly read, go to my LinkedIn page to get some insights of who I am. This is my office at SUNY. And like I mentioned, because I'm the director of the State University of New York system, which is the largest comprehensive university-connected research foundations in the country, I have under me not one, not two, not three, but actually as many as 64 universities that I'm handling technology transfer for, 30 of whom are very prolific in the IP that they eventually produce. And of course, we are doing research upwards of $1.5 billion. And in my treasure trove, I have approximately 1,830 patents sitting in my portfolio. And Parag would know that many of them he is helping me to find a good home across the world, and we are really indebted to getting to make sure that that eventually ends up happening. So I'm going to quickly not take too much time. I'll probably take the next 5 minutes to give you a general idea of why value of death is important and what the basic issues are with finding a good home and how entrepreneurs can eventually work with tech transfer offices globally. As I mentioned earlier, that most of the research that is done in university really comes from federal dollars. So 90% of the money that is coming into research that eventually makes inventions are from federal dollars. And since I am the chair, I used to be the chair of AUTM, here is a graphic description that shows that the amount of money that is pumped in by the government is somewhat coinciding with the amount of disclosures and inventions we get. So the red line on the bottom is the amount of money that the government is putting into the system since 1991. And in the last 35 years, we've seen almost an inextricable link of the number of disclosures and the amount of money that's coming. And when we map it all out, a very rough estimate is that for every $4.2 million of research that happens in a university, there should be at least one invention. And how that invention finds a home is something that is left upon the tech transfer office. The concept earlier was that the issue with mostly finding a home is because of the fact that these technologies are not de-risked well enough. So by de-risking, it means that when the invention disclosures come to a tech transfer office, it is short of that very few experiments that is needed for these technologies to be considered to be beyond the value of death, which is to make it a little more money is needed for it to some additional experiments to be done to get it through the point where we can eventually make validation that a technology works. But in today's day and age, it's not just a component of money, it's actually a bunch of other things that causes the value of debt to happen. Some of which I've kind of mapped out. And again, these can be subject to a longer discussion that we can always talk. But of course, time is limited, so I will not go into excruciating details on this. But aside from money, I just wanted to again highlight the fact that there is more to it. It's market validation, it's customer industry matchmaking, it's about IP strengthening and strategy. There has to be regulatory guidance that the entrepreneurs will need to get. The business model has to be conceived. Satish spoke a little bit about the business model canvas. That's something that needs to be very well defined. We have to eventually help the startup formation and the team building to make sure that it's not just a lean team, but the team has experience and that they have enough funds to eventually get it to the next level and have all the skills and acumen for that entrepreneur to take the technology to the next level, which is not just money, but way more than just money itself. So what we typically do is when we eventually have anybody come and knock our door to say, hey, tech transfer office, I would like to take your invention and take it to the next level, we ask them to provide us the business model canvas. Like I mentioned, Satish mentioned quite a bit in detail. And what we eventually perceive is to see where are the gaps that these potential startups have to take it to the next technology. And we map it. And as those gaps are being defined, we provide support to these startups. So our tech transfer office is not just an IP warehouse. It's actually an office that provides support to entrepreneurs to take the technology to the next level. And the support could be wherever the gap resides, whether it's funding that they need, whether it's advisory, whether it's education, whether they need help in developing a website, whether they want to eventually get help in putting pitch together, whether they want connections with the venture or the angel arms, whether they want to build their own team. And so all these are mapped out in this neat scheme. Of course, this is only for the SUNY system because I work there. I used to work for the Johns Hopkins University earlier, and there was a similar potential for Johns Hopkins University to do it in the same way. So depending on which university, the kind of assistance we provide is the same. The idea is, again, we want to make sure that the startup eventually succeeds and we provide them with all the successes. And just like we provide the services, we expect the startup to come and ask us for what we can provide to them aside from just the license that they get. And so, like I said, more than 70% of the technologies go into startups, but several technologies obviously go to companies as well. And so this is a graph that depicts how a university research office is funded. And like I said, 90% of the funding comes from mostly assistance from outside the companies, but which is depicted by the orange and the yellow line. But if you look at the line right at the bottom, which is round about 10%, it's the money that is coming in from corporate entities. So we have realized that as the federal government is getting tougher and tougher to get grants and money, we have to eventually take care of all the assistance we can get from companies. And so the red line is something we want to eventually go beyond the 10%, and that we can accomplish only if you work together with industries. Now, the beautiful thing about working with industry is that they are usually a good guide for us to tell us what the need really is in the marketplace. And like I mentioned, if the research is driven by need, half the job is typically done. So the government has started building programs around a triple helix model where they work with the university and they work with the industry and provide funding only when the university and the industry have already established a relationship. And that's called the triple helix model. And so we want to make sure that the grants that are being awarded by the government in a triple helix structure are the grants where we have already made relationship with the company And the driver then is not just the IP, but a strategic way that we can create impact and also create an ecosystem around it. One of the examples for that, many of you know, as I was working in Hopkins, is the Alexa app. So this was a success story that happened where we worked with Amazon. And in the last 15 years, we have taken Alexa from an LLM model, which at that time was a novice. Nobody even knew what the acronym LLM or large language model stood for. But eventually, we have taken up it for it to become the Alexa app, which is fortunately, again, a Johns Hopkins and Amazon relationship that helped us to get to where we are. The COVID, these are success stories I'm just sharing quickly. A COVID diagnostic test was developed by Frank Middleton at my university. And again, that was a coronavirus saliva test. And the testing that you had done during the time COVID was on was mostly through, again, a research that program that came with cooperation between a company, academia, and the university. So quickly mapping out here from a success story, there's a lot that happens. Only if you talk about some tech transfer numbers in the last year, 2024, mapped out by autumn, we see that a whopping 951 startups were formed in the US just from academic tech transfer, and that in and of itself is a major success story. Nothing would have happened if it wasn't for Baidool, and as all of you know, Baidool is sort of the cornerstone, which happens to be the piece of legislation that was created way back about 50-ish years ago, 47 to be precise. 46, it was created in 1981, where the federal government gave access to universities to handle the IP from all the research that is done. And Baidool, as you all know, has been adopted by several countries. India was very close to adopting it, but hasn't adopted it yet. But that is a cornerstone piece of act and legislation that has helped India and several other countries to get technologies from the universities to the lab space. And so, obviously, because Baidool is important and federal grants are important, on behalf of Autumn, I've been privileged to work a lot with the federal government. So I actually live in DC, and I'm right now relaying this from Washington, DC as I speak. And I do happen to go out to meet with several of our senators and members of the Congress to try and tell them what Autumn is all about, what tech transfer is all about, and why it is important for the government to pump in money and get it to where it is today. This is a glimpse of my team. We are feverishly working together to make some of these innovations to become success stories. And it's been a wonderful journey for me in the last few years to get it to where it was. So here, I'm going to stop here. Hopefully, again, Hemant was courteous enough to give me the extra 8 minutes. And if you have any questions, I have my email address, my LinkedIn page is available. Feel free to shoot an email. And as I said, I just ran through my slides. I hope this all made sense. And if there's anything I can help you with, or we can discuss more in details of any of the components that we talked. Back to you, Hemant, or Parag, whoever.
Thank you. Thank you.